On December 24th, way back in 2017, which feels far away now almost, I went to a midnight mass near my house at an Episcopal congregation of similar spirit and friendliness as this house of peace, as this community welcoming and kind, a people that loves to greet one another, old friends and new. The congregation leaned in for their Christmas Eve sermon, in which the preacher, Reverend Davies, said, "There's a tremendous amount of need for the stable, the assured." He was talking about the stable not as an ancient barn for animals in which a mother was to give birth, but for today's refuge, the stable, the assured, a quality of having balance, an inability to be turned over, not to deteriorate further, or not likely to change or fail. A lot of my focus in supporting people with chronic medical conditions that prevent them from feeling certain is to talk about what it means to feel assured about our health. Maybe a long-term or chronic condition like lupus or heart failure or fibromyalgia, or many others of which we might be more or less familiar. When Reverend Davies was mentioning this, the stable, not as a location, but as this state of being, I wondered, and I still think about, where is this sensible place? I want to go to there. Is it a place? Or is it an us? Can we be the assured? While most of my time in Unitarian Universalist congregations on Sundays is as a traveler or a guest like today, I'm also a member of a church without walls called the Church of the Larger Fellowship. And Reverend Meg Riley, in her weekly message to the congregation, wrote to us this past week that there's many good reasons to feel unassured right now, to maybe even feel some degree of instability. It might lead us to some thinking like, what might I buy or eat or drink or smoke or say or do that will make me feel better even for a moment? Where could I move? How could I protect people I love? How much of this or that would make me feel safer? She says that one way to keep calm could be to stay numb or detached, but she says, and I agree, that we can't afford to do that. That's one of the reasons we reach out to community. For people coping daily with a chronic condition, they might feel well appraised of what Reverend Meg Riley or Reverend Davies were saying, because to completely detach would often have terrible results for health or basic well-being. On one level, the desire to connect is a desire to survive, to get to the doctor, to pick up the prescription, to call the friend who will get you to the next doctor's appointment, and to answer the doorbell when the new medical equipment arrives. It's functional, but it's precious. On another level, there's the desire to connect that we spoke about today in our responsive reading. In the words of Starhawk, we are all longing to go to where a circle of hands will open to receive us. Eyes will light up when we enter. Voices will celebrate with us that we have come into our own power. Or if we have been sick or had a bad week, or if we have been rocked by the events of our world, simply celebrate with us that we got dressed and we came to church today. With or without a chronic illness, the desire to stretch and extend ourselves to relationships with others poses a formidable challenge to any individual wound or feeling of brokenness. Cope well in community. What wondrous love is this? Perhaps that got you here today. How glad I am for your presence and to be among you again in Troop Church. It's been about a year. This time is precious. I never really understood the pricelessness of time until I experienced my first long cycle of fatigue. Not just being a bit sleepy, but the clinical fatigue. I had about 4 hours of awake time a day, which I had to use strategically, and it had to be at the right time. If it were the wrong time of day, if the cat meowed all night and kept me awake, if something else got in the way, this would shorten the time. Sometimes just using the time to bathe and eat breakfast would require a nap. Even when I was awake, very often I was foggy in the brain. It felt like I was moving through a soft cheese to get to my next thought or recall the last. I have a chronic illness. Even though I didn't always recognize it as such, I thought I might be depressed. I thought I might be just feeling a little bit lazy. Other people told me maybe I had just done too many things at once and it caught up to me. Some question if I weren't just tired of being in graduate school because they said, oh, you're too young to be so tired or so achy or so irritable. The fact is that I was sick. I was out of spoons. So what is it with these spoons? Maybe you've seen them in the Facebook announcement or the sermon title. The author of the website, butyoudontlooksick.com, Christine Miserando, who has fibromyalgia and lupus, shared a story of a conversation with her best friend in college, where they went from talking about music or trivial things, and then suddenly got serious about Christine's illness. And this shortened version of the story, which I'll tell you now, has been shared widely amongst the chronic illness community, and I'll tell it from Christine's perspective. I was sitting and talking over French fries with my friend Samantha. As I went to take some of my medicine, as I usually did, Samantha suddenly looked at me with this awkward stare instead of just continuing our usual conversation. She then asked me out of the blue what it felt like to have lupus and to be sick. I was shocked, not only because she asked the random question, because I thought she knew everything there was about lupus from being my roommate and coming to doctors with me. She'd seen me walk with a cane. She'd seen me cry in pain. What else was there to know? I started to ramble on about pills and aches and pains, but she kept pursuing and didn't seem satisfied. I was a little surprised, but then she leaned in and asked what it felt like, not physically, but what it felt like to be me. How do I answer such a question I was never able to answer for myself? If I can't explain this to my best friend, how could I explain my world to anyone else? And at that moment, the spoon theory was born. I quickly grabbed every spoon on the table. Heck, I grabbed spoons off of other tables. I looked her in the eyes and said, "Here you go, you have lupus." And I handed her a bouquet of spoons. She looked at me quite confused, as anyone would be if they were handed a bouquet of spoons. She grabbed them with excitement, though. I asked her to count the spoons. I explained that when you're healthy, you expect to have a never-ending supply of spoons, unless you're like me with the dishwasher, but that's another sermon, another story. But when you have to now plan your day, you have to know exactly how many spoons you are starting with. It doesn't guarantee that you won't lose some along the way, but at least it helps to know how many you start with. So she counted out 12 spoons. Samantha laughed and said she wanted some more. I said no, firmly, and she looked disappointed. I said, I've wanted more spoons for years and haven't found a way to get more. I also told her that she needed to be conscious of how many she started with and not to drop them, because you never get to forget that you have a chronic illness. I asked her to list off the tasks of her day, including the most simple. As she rattled off daily chores or just fun things to do, I explained how each one would cost her a spoon. When she jumped right into getting ready for work, I said, no, you don't just get to get up. You have to crack open your eyes and then realize you are late. You didn't sleep well the night before. You have to crawl out of bed and then make yourself something to eat before you can do anything else. Because if you don't, you can't take your medicine. If you don't take your medicine, well, you might as well just give all your spoons away right then. I quickly took away a spoon, and she realized she hadn't even gotten dressed yet. Showering cost her a spoon. Getting dressed was worth another spoon. You cannot simply just throw clothes on when you're sick. I explained that I have to see what clothes I can physically put on. If my hands were swollen or hurt, buttons out of the question. If I had a fever, I needed a sweater to stay warm. If my hair was sort of patchy, I needed to spend more time to look presentable. And then you need to factor in another 5 minutes for feeling bad about how it took you 2 hours to do this. I think she was starting to understand, but when she didn't even get to work and she was already left with 6 spoons, she seemed disappointed. But I said, now you have to just choose wisely. Since your spoons are gone, they're gone. Sometimes you can borrow against tomorrow's spoons, but then you have to factor in that the next day will have less spoons available. You don't want to run low because we don't know when we'll truly need them. We went through the rest of the day, and she learned that skipping lunch at work might cost her a spoon, as well as standing on a train or typing at her computer too long. She was forced to make choices and think about things differently. Hypothetically, she had to choose not to run errands so that she could eat dinner. When we got to the end of her pretend day, she said she was hungry. I summarized that we had to eat dinner, but she only had 1 spoon left. So I rarely at this point saw Samantha emotional, and I didn't want my friend to be upset. But at the same time, I was happy to think that maybe finally somehow she understood me a little bit more. She asked quietly, Christine, how do you do it? Do you really do this every day? I explained that some days were worse than others. Some days I had more spoons than other days. I handed her a spoon, the one that I'd been holding in reserve. I said simply, I have learned to live with an extra spoon in my pocket, in reserve. You have to always be prepared. It's hard. It's hard to learn to slow down and not do everything. She said, I hate feeling left out or choosing to stay home. I wanted her to understand that for me, 1 job might equal 100 little jobs. It's the beautiful ability that some without chronic illness to not think and to just do. She told her friend, I miss that freedom. But at least now she felt like Samantha might not complain so much when she can't go out for dinner sometimes, or when she couldn't make it out of the house, and that Samantha needed to come over to hers to visit. During this may seem like a sad story, but during the most ill periods of my own life, I wish I had had Christine's spoon theory to help me explain to the people I loved, to the communities I often was missing out on, what was going on. I wish I had known, too, that I was a spoonie, as so many who have learned from Christine's story, which is now famous and has taken on lots of graphics and different blog entries about what it's like to be a spoonie, even spoonie bingo. Now the condition I have, which is a profound form of hypothyroidism that resulted from a series of masses and surgeries, evens out for longer periods of time. Right now I'm close to what normal or healthy might look like and have been for about 2.5 years. But I know it can and will likely change, that counting my spoons is still an important part of my life. I also know that being a graduate student during some of the sick times of my life protected me from a lot of the economic issues that people with chronic conditions in the US face. Underinsurance, not having enough coverage to get what they need, or being maxed out by a number of copayments when you're going to see the whole team of doctors and appointments that determine your well-being. For some of the people I've worked with, maybe the sum of the people you know, maybe even yourself, the hours on hold trying to get care or to get care covered can use up all the spoons you've got for the day. Christine's story ends on a hopeful note. Walking out of the diner, she writes, "I gave Samantha a hug. I had that one final blessing, that reserved spoon in my hand, and I said, 'Don't worry. I see this as a blessing. I've been forced to think about the things that I do. Do you know how many spoons everyone wastes every day? I don't have room for wasted time or wasted spoons, and I choose to spend my time, this time, with you.'" Christine and people who cope with chronic illness give a piece of themselves in every sense of the word when they do anything. Even church uses a spoon, but it is a precious spoon. Participating in communities such as ours can be life-giving as well as challenging. There's lots we can do or say to support people with chronic conditions. First and foremost, we can believe them. When they tell us what life is like or what limitations or challenges they are facing, "I believe you" is possibly the most powerful thing we can say to one another. When we affirm our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, we are saying in some way, "I believe in you." Another thing we can do is offer space for people with chronic conditions to gather together. And so I'm so glad that Reverend Tara and your community and Troop Church have decided to take this up and offer a support group once every other week on Wednesdays at 11 in your fireside room. And I'm so excited to return to be with you. It's a time to give the inner teacher in ourselves a time to teach, to let our stories emerge and name what support looks like for us. I believe each of us, spoonies and non-spoonies, can strengthen community resilience. We can each be that reserve spoon in our collective back pocket, learning from the strategies developed by people like Christine who have chronic illnesses to survive and to thrive. Together we can live into our faith mission and vision. Let us sing now out proudly and in deep faith. Let this house be a place of peace. Let's rise in body.